It looks like there's a question from Barbara. Can you restate the requirements for contamination documentation? Who does that need to come from? Do you want to address that?
That documentation is going to come from the applicant. A level 1 is the typical contamination documentation that we would require. The applicant would probably get a consultant to provide that support for contamination for your particular project. If you don't have that expertise in-house. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. And one thing that, just to point out, at the bottom of the agenda, which is attached as a handout, is the link to our PD&E manual. So the expectations about all those different questions and resources are in that manual as well, more details. And then the next question, Ruth, when you're referring to a project manager, is this an internal county project manager or a state? Oh, this is the FDEP grant program. So as an applicant, you will have a username, password to SWEPT, which DEP will let us know who the folks are that will have those accounts. They'll let 2 know, and then we'll set up the accounts. And once you fill out your type 1 CE, it'll first go to DEP, and then a person at DEP, and then they'll forward it to 2 for review and approval. So it's that 2-step approval process. Are there any more questions?
I don't see any, but I do notice that we have a couple of hands raised. So Barbara, was that your question that you hopefully added onto the chat box? Does that address your issue? And then also Donna and Katie, if you can put your question in the box, that would help us out as well. All right, perfect. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for putting it in the question box. I see a question about who can complete cultural forms, who can complete noise, etc. I think what typically will happen is, as the applicant, you are probably, if you don't have that expertise in-house, you're probably going to be acquiring the support of a consultant to help you prepare your type 1 CE and complete the appropriate analysis. So, you're going to need to have a biologist to do the species section. You're going to have someone that is meets the requirements for cultural resources, as Roy talked about earlier, so forth and so on. So you're going to be needing to do those. The next question about what is the average cost for consultant help, and that's just going to depend on the scope of your project as well. I don't have an answer for you for that one. But if anyone on our team or has an answer to that, please feel free to share.
I was just going to add too that it ultimately depends on the level of involvement with the types of resources that are being examined and the relationship of the project to those resources. There's no other way to answer that question. The costs come in by hour and by task. And some tasks are required to be completed, others wouldn't be. For example, if you identified no historic resources at all, then you would not have to worry about the evaluation of them and the coordination of that evaluation with the consulting party. So it depends on the complexity and the level of involvement.
Right, thanks, Roy.
Maybe Roy, to your point about the hours, we do have a staff hour estimation guideline that doesn't necessarily directly relate to a cost, but it's a tool that at least, someone could look at to gauge, depending on that complexity, what maybe a reasonable range of hours might be per resource or issue that you might have on a particular project where you do need to get a consultant to support you on those efforts.
Yeah, Katasha is 100% right. If there's a certain amount of hours that may be required per site file form for an historic building, a certain amount of hours related to a site file form per an archaeological site, and so forth.
Thanks, Roy and Katasha. I see a question on here, and we might need some support from our DEP Rec Trail staff. How long does the whole process take from start to finish? Grant timelines are very tight between agreement approval and the project having to start.
Hey, so this is Tara, Recreational Trails Program with DEP. It's my understanding that the Nepa documentation that's been presented by FDOT, as well as the Task 1 documentation with us, FDEP, will all be required. So actually, once the priority list has been approved by Federal Highway, all of the projects that were approved for funding will need to submit their NEPA documentation, and then depending on the outcome of that eligibility, then you'll move into, we'll execute a grant agreement, and then once the grant agreements are executed, then the grantees will have 180 days to submit their Task 1 documentation.
Thanks, Tara. Oops, my questions just moved around. There's a question about, does FDOT or FDEP have recommendations on consultants or contracts to piggy off of? Does anyone? Katasha, do you want to take that one?
So the only thing I think we could potentially say is that we may be able to get a list of pre-qualified consultants from our procurement office, but we can't really make recommendations.
Right, that's what I thought too. Thank you. The next question, will these forms be expected prior to funding approval? These consultant fees can be expensive and prohibitive. And I think that question can probably be better answered by an FDEP representative about the funding mechanism. I'm not sure exactly when dollars are actually given to the grantees.
So once the priority list has been approved, grantees, I believe we're including NEPA expenses as part of any pre-agreement expenses that can be requested at the time of reimbursement. But typically, any cost incurred during this planning period is usually reimbursed as a single payment at the very end once the project's complete. But I believe with some of our 19 projects, and we'll discuss this more in the afternoon segment, if any projects already have planning expenses included in their scope of work, then those grantees are eligible to request biannual payments. And again, we'll go over that more this afternoon, but NEPA costs and the cost to prepare this documentation will be included with planning expenses.
Thanks, Tara. We have a question from Julie, and I think this is in reference to the staff hour sheet. Where is the hour sheet located? And I don't know if that's openly available to the public or if that's something internal. Katasha, can you help out with that one?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have that posted on our website that's available, and I was chatting to the organizers that we may be able to add that on the list of resources or share that after.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Regarding wildlife natural resources for the grant project that we currently have, we use FNA to acquire these inventories. Is that no longer acceptable? I think FNA is one of those resources, but when it comes to protected species, federally listed species, definitely reach out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their resources and National Marine Fisheries Service to get the exact list in your project area. Katasha, did you have any thoughts on FNA being the only resource?
I agree with you too. I mean, per the actually Endangered Species Act and the FHWA guidance that we have to follow, we really have to go to the source, which is Fish and Wildlife Service or National Marine Fisheries. And so, like Tu had suggested earlier, there are tools out there that you can use to get a list of, the potential species within your project limits, and then you can kind of do some additional field work or whatever to narrow down that list as you're looking to determine whether you need to go through consultation or not.
Perfect, thank you. The next question from Katie. Our project is very small, just a number of square feet. Base fees for consultants may not reflect this small size and simplicity. What should we do when consultant fees may significantly offset or eat into our grant award? I think, Tara, is that something that you would like to answer? I think from the funding aspect, I'm going to pass that off to FDEP staff.
Sue, can you repeat that?
It says, this question is from Katie McMillan. Our project is very small, just a number of square feet. Base fees for consultants may not reflect this small size and simplicity. What should we do when consultant fees may significantly offset or eat into our grant award?
So as far as the planning expenses, grantees can only request up to 15% of the total project cost. So unfortunately, if there's a large chunk of planning expenses for your project, the amount that is eligible for reimbursement is only 15% of the actual total project cost. That's all that we are allowed to reimburse for as far as planning expenses go. The other remaining costs are to be paid for by the grantee.
Right, thanks, Tara. I think the next question is also yours. Can the investment made in the NEPA process be utilized as a match?
I'd have to consult with Rebecca on that. She stepped out for a minute, but I want to say probably not. I think we're including NEPA as part of a planning expense and not necessarily part of like construction of the project. But again, I can confirm that with her and we can kind of send out a follow-up email to all the grantees about that.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question, in circumstances where a consultant finds that no impact will occur, is a memo or letter sufficient documentation? Ultimately, when we're making that decision and the documentation we're looking for, we have to have the appropriate justification that there are no impacts. So they're gonna need to, identify whether they did a field for species or wetlands, for example. There's a field visit, maybe looking at providing GIS maps of the project area showing that there are no wetland impacts, for example. So we need to have documentation to support that there are going to be no impacts. So hopefully that's helpful, Barbara. And then one more question for you, Tara. So is there a time frame between being approved and getting the NEPA complete and an agreement in place?
That's a good question. I don't really know the time frame. Usually it's a quick turnaround between when the priority list of signing grant agreements are executed. However, since NEPA is going to be required prior to the execution of a grant agreement, we'll probably have to establish a timeline for that. It was my understanding that it would be 180 days, similar to that of task one for commencement. But again, I'll probably have to confirm that since it's not really going to be due at the time of commencement, it's going to be due prior. So again, I'll confirm that with Rebecca and send that in the follow-up email to the grantees.
Thanks, Tara. And I think that was our last question, unless someone, other folks have more questions to add into the chat box. I mean, the question box, sorry.
Two, did you see the one from Barbara? In circumstances where a consultant finds that no impact will occur, as a memo or letter sufficient documentation?
Yes, and I think I answered that one where ultimately we're still going to need some kind of justification where there is no impact. You know, a memo, a letter is sufficient with the appropriate justification. So, you know, maps showing the project area, you know, for example, if there are no wetlands in the area, you know, that can provide the supporting information that's needed. Because oftentimes we can just say no impact, but we really need to provide appropriate documentation to demonstrate that.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no more questions, I think that's it for the webinar. So the plan is to see if we can see, oh, Julie just asked, having examples of completed, I think you mean the type 1 CE and supporting documents, and 2 had mentioned she was going to try and find those so we can post those. So our plan is to post this recording, post all the PowerPoints that were presented. We're also going to separately post the swept video, so if that's all you need to watch, you don't have to go through the whole webinar. And then we'll get that link for the staff hours, come up with an example, and we'll post all those on our website so that you have access to them. So that's our plan in wrapping this up. And of course, if you have any questions with more project specific questions, we're always here to help. So just let us know. Thank you very much.